Hello everyone and welcome to episode 81 of Podcasts vs. Enemies, a Destiny Massive Breakdown show. My name is Court and I'm joined by the usual trifecta fire team, Impetus and Saint. We are also fresh off a Heist Battleground Moon Grandmaster, which is great timing as we'll be doing some classic activity breakdowns and sharing some builds for those pesky new GMs this season. Impetus and Saint, I hope you are both well. Let's kick this episode off. Saint, what have you been up to?
It is the featured week for Root of Nightmares, and I still got some friends that are looking for their conditional finalities, so been doing a lot of Nezi checkpoint farming. Most of the people looking for the shotgun have gotten it, but unfortunately we still got a few people hanging on for the edge there. One point in the original night of farming that we had set out, we had 6 of them drop for everyone except for the guy that actually organized the farm. That was a bit of a tough look. Yeah, but The other 2 people that were looking for it both got it. So, hey, we'll take that. Plus, some people that already had it may have gotten 1 to 3 more, but that's fine, Probably going to be doing a few more of those. Also, finally got back to playing some comp this week. Mercurial Overreach is a statistical anomaly because of its insane base stats and those stocks that some weapons have, like a DMT, that just add on an extra 10 to 15 stat point to some categories. So kind of reluctantly got back in there with some friends and actually had a fine time running some comp matches, got some pretty good rolls on that. Still looking for that opening shot roll. And then, just rounding out some GMs for the season, finishing up that Conqueror Guild now that node is up. Ran some GMs with the lads here. Impetus?
Yes, sir. Haven't done a whole lot. Did a master challenge for ERU with the team. Slowly making my way through that raid and its challenges. Got an Adept Word of Crota drop. Not quite the role that I was looking for. Didn't get the fun one that Court had gotten a week prior. Unfortunately, I've been soft blocked on the final seasonal mission for all 3 characters, so that is unfortunate. I really do want to finish it, but I'm not allowed to do the thing that you're supposed to do. I don't want to spoil it, even though it's been out for a full week at this point, but hoping to get that fixed up. Weather's been getting a little chilly, so of course I have made some chili in return. Also got a sore throat as it is with the changing of the temperature, so I may not be talking a whole lot this episode, but been a light week for Destiny play, but still had a good time on the stuff that I have done, except for these 2 new GMs that we just went through. Those are not quite as fun. Court, how about you?
I'm doing well. I'm curious how that soft block happened.
It's without getting into too many details, let's just say there's an immunity shield that does not disappear.
Right. I thought you meant you just couldn't launch the activity, right? Okay.
Oh, no. Okay. I get all the way to the end, and then I come to a dead stop.
Oof. Yes, big oof. Mm-hmm. Yes, Impetus mentioned already, massive challenge for Uryu. Pretty fun, pretty interesting. A lot happening on that. But fairly entertaining challenge mode for Master Uryu. And a few Grandmasters, a few loaded questions in the bag for both PvE and PvP. And for me, if you're familiar with my various Destiny projects, then you'll know that my damage stacking infographic is out. And if you don't know, then, well, there you go. It's out. You can see it on my spreadsheet, the Destiny Massive Breakdowns Discord, or over on the Linktree. That's Linktree/Destiny Spreadsheets. It's over there. There's a Reddit breakdown. There's parts of my spreadsheet that goes into more kind of supplementary detail. But if you just want a high-level view of how damage stacking works and where all the various damage stacking modifiers exist in terms of categories, then head over and check that out. I also want to shout out D2 Checkpoint. The staff over there very kindly gave me a VIP role on their Discord and just thanked me for my contributions to the community. Go check them out. If you're looking for various checkpoints for Destiny raids and dungeons, check out the website, d2checkpoint.com. Over back to you, Impetus.
Yes, so you may have noticed at the very start of this episode that things sounded a little bit differently. We do have a new intro that was gifted to us, so we want to give a big thank you to DNB/PvE listener Nems for sending in a synthwave remix intro of the all-in track that we use for the intro music. So thank you very much. That is a pleasure to listen to, and you can look forward to hearing that for the foreseeable future at the start of all of our upcoming episodes. And as always, we want to give a special shout out to the people that support this show right here at the beginning of the episode. Those people, of course, at the top of the list are the sponsors, the folks who go above and beyond monetarily to keep this episode and our future episodes out on a weekly basis for the rest of you. So without further ado, thank you to A Modern Viking, Asking Monk, Bryce Aroni, Deacon, I'm K. Rose, Moonlight, and This Moment. Your support is greatly appreciated. Additionally, you can send us all kinds of feedback directly to any of our socials or via the Destiny Massive Breakdowns Discord server. All kinds of feedback help with the trajectory of the podcast and how we present and break down builds, activities, and so much more in the PvE sandbox for all kinds of Destiny players. We also want to extend a special thanks and appreciation to everyone that supports PvE, whether that is downloading and listening to our show, discussing it on social media and our Discord server, or supporting us via Patreon. Speaking of Patreon, if you'd like to support the show, please visit DestinyMassiveBreakdowns.com and click on the link to Patreon. You'll get access to members-only channels and Discords, behind-the-scenes info like episodes previews, input on the future of the show, and access to the legendary annual merch drop. All right, Saint, what are we talking about today?
Talk about how I can't stop playing that intro over and over again, both in my head and through my speakers. Really, just absolutely loving that one. Feeling like we made it with the custom intro here. But this episode, we're going to talk about the October 5th TWID. We got a little bit of a kind of mid-season preview, update highlights, as well as some future seasonal stuff. They hinted at some buffs and things like that are coming to PvE, which we're definitely keen on. And then we're going to be talking about the Heist Battleground Moon and Heist Battleground Europa GMs, giving, just kind of a few tips and pointers about enemies that you're going to see in there, and then the loadouts that we have been running through those GMs this season. Regarding the next few episodes of PvE, kind of future topics and things like that, we're going to keep revisiting the PvE basics over pretty much the rest of this season and maybe next season if there's some stuff that we can't quite get to. We've got a few more topics kind of similar to episode 80 with our massive grenade breakdown. We went through the 30 plus grenade options in the game, kind of how they compare, why we prefer some over the others, and what we would take, what we would leave, that kind of a thing. We would love to hear from you all, listeners, anybody listening to the show, on what areas of the game that you think could use a deep dive. Kind of things are gray, things are blurry for the in-game, they're not really clear, something that you want us to really dig in on and explain. A term that we use, slang that gets thrown around a lot, methodology that just is not familiar to you, why people consider one build better than another, all these kind of things. We want to address these kinds of questions that the community has now, so you guys feel equipped as we go into the final shape. Sure, things will change and evolve a little bit, but a lot of these PvE basics things are probably going to stay at the same at their core. So please reach out to us, social media, if you've got a topic in mind, or in the Massive Breakdowns Discord. We got a channel specifically for the podcast where you can jump in and talk about the show. All right, kicking things off here with the TWID from the 5th. Some minor updates at the front here. Exotic focusing costs are going to be changing a little bit. So the tier 1 focusing a random exotic from a year is 30,000 glimmer, 10 enhancement prisms. Before, this was 30,000 glimmer and an ascendant shard. And then the tier 2, so focusing a specific exotic, is still going to be 60,000 glimmer, but now it's just 2 ascendant shards rather than 3 ascendant shards and an exotic cipher. So still a lot of glimmer, but those high-end kind of in-game materials are getting taken down a little bit. Courts, we got some mid-season changes coming here. What are we looking at for our current season mid-season patch?
Yeah, so the big one here does affect hunters. I obviously don't use a lot of Solar Hunter these days because I think the other subclasses are. I just personally think they're in a better spot. I know physically and objectively that's Solar Hunter's in a really good spot as well. But yes, young Ahamkara's Spine is one of the big changes. The other one was the Antaeus Wars with Titan, but obviously that's more kind of curated towards the PvP sandbox. But yeah, this will be affecting both sandboxes. So reduce the trip mine grenades bonus health from 100 to 70. And remove the bonus 50% damage resistance. That's more of a PvP change there. But this big kind of point, I know a lot of sentiment's been going around the Destiny community. Grenade energy is now provided on ability kills instead of damage with abilities. So when you damaged with your the grenade itself, your super, your melee, and if you also got that first tick of Scorch, you would get 33% instantly with your trip mine grenades. They haven't given us numbers here. I'm going to presume it's still going to be 33% on kill rather than just damage. I don't think it's necessarily a huge blow in PvE. Obviously, this is a big change in PvP. But yeah, just some really quick thoughts. Saint, Impetus, what's your vibes with this change?
I'm devastated. I mean, this is all I use on Solar Hunter. It's a young Ahamkara Spine, and I do love chaining the abilities, so I wish they would have at least halved the grenade energy provided first, and then maybe tested things out. I mean, again, it's a mid-season patch. I'm not quite sure how quickly the armor team works, but I feel like it would have been nice for a mid-season patch to go with half grenade energy provided on ability damage, and then if it's still too extreme, bump that up to what it is going to be maybe for the end of the season going into season 23. But yeah, this is a bummer. I run Frosties on a lot of my various Hunter builds, and it feels like I'm going to be forced back into that route with Solar Hunter. So I wish that could not have been the case, that I would still keep using young Ahamkaras. Again, I can totally understand from a balancing point of view that ability spam, ability chaining is definitely becoming more of an outlier. Young Ahamkara Spine was certainly becoming more of an outlier with the other kinds of changes and tweaks made to exotic armor over the past few seasons, over the past few years, really. But it just felt fun, really, to chain this, and I didn't think it was crazy strong in high-level PvE content, but I guess Bungie disagrees with me.
Well, the change here that they mentioned, we want to bring its total bonus grenade energy more in line with other solar ability-focused exotics like Athers's Embrace and Caliban's Hand. And I suppose we're also in a different sandbox. We've got stuff like Grenade Kickstart. We've got things that can give us grenade energy back. So I can see why their kind of desire to kind of normalize it down a little bit. But yeah, no, I can see your points where 33% was, you only had to hit with your grenade itself, get a Scorch tick and a melee, and you get your grenade back, and just do that again. So,
yeah,
I mean, I was certainly hyping
slow
up
way down, right?
Yeah, I hyped it up this time last year, or this time 50 months ago, during Season the Haunted, which is when obviously Solar 3.0 arrived in the sandbox. So I was certainly exploiting it, and I kind of had an inclination that this would probably get reduced down. So
this is
Saint, you got any?
Yeah, it's just like the nature of the PvE PvP balance, and sometimes there are things that they change for the sake of the PvE sandbox or for the PvP sandbox that have repercussions negatively on the either side. I'm more of a Caliban's Hand man myself, so I'm not feeling this necessarily as much.
Explosions.
Yeah, right. I'm just a Titan trying to make Mr. Torg proud in a hunter's body. Really is what's going on there usually, but it's kind of the nature of the game,
Yeah, I mean, we'll all give it a little test drive whenever this mid-season update is out, and we'll give our thoughts after that. Next up, we've got SMGs increased recoil globally by 10% and reduced the mouse and keyboard stability bonus from 20 to 10%. Just a little kind of highlight there for obviously that applies primarily in PvP, but also applies in PvP. Next up, we have adaptive auto rifles. So think of Old Sterling, which is the Season 21 World Drop, Koronak 22, which is the Season 20 Suros weapon World Drop, Perpetualis, which is the Defiance weapon. We've got the Summoner, we've got the Skaithlock, and then obviously Gnawing Hunger applies to this, which I'm still using these days. Increased base damage from 14.25 to 15. It doesn't sound a lot, but obviously this is the extreme base amount. It's not taking into consideration the activity modifiers, combatant multipliers, all that kind of jazz. And then they've decreased the critical hit multiplier from 1.6 to 1.55, but the critical damage goes from 22.8 damage to 23.3. So again, we're talking quite small numbers here, but it is a net gain for adapted auto rifles, which have, we've kind of we spoke about adaptives before. They're kind of a little bit meh when it comes to the sandbox, so hopefully this will kind of increase it. They do talk about auto rifles in general. We'll be getting a damage buff next season as well. Aggressive, adaptive, and rapid fire sniper rifles, another weapon that will be getting a flat, they say here for snipers anyway, a flat 15% damage buff in the Season 23, but in the mid-season update, they're getting their body shot damages reduced and their critical hit multipliers increased. Again, more of a PvP change here. They have kind of said that their desire to stop in the PvP sandbox to stop kind of one-shot kind of body shots. But we are, of course, going to see that in PvE, and we'll obviously see the critical hit multipliers as well. But then next season we'll get that flat damage buff. They keep buffing snipers. We'll see how that lands next season. And lastly, they kind of gave us a little teaser. They are increasing the base PvE damage for glaive projectiles, and we are, of course, getting the glaive rework and the exotic glaive changes. That's the big kind of highlight. I think the three of us are all kind of excited for is the class exotic glaives. Looking really interested in seeing what they're kind of planning, what they're cooking up for those glaives. Already mentioned here, increased damage against minor combatants for pulse rifles and auto rifles. That's in Season 23. And lastly, we have greatly increased damage against champions for Revision 0 and Vex Mythoclast. That last one's quite surprising, although it kind of needs it.
Well, it definitely needs it.
I mean, I'll just take increased damage against minor enemies for Vex Mythoclast, because my goodness, that Heist Battleground Europa was tough, man. That was brutal.
We did a run where we were kind of like memeing around, and we were trying to, let's all use X and let's all use Y. And one of those runs was Vex Mythoclast, and man, that was not.
I just want to go back. Just want to go back.
The meme run turned into a complete disaster. It was no longer a meme.
Yeah. Revision 0, though.
I was going to say.
Looking kind of hot.
They keep buffing
weapon
that thing.
Plus greatly increased damage to champions. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
And I think that this... we've talked about this a little bit in terms of just like the anti-barrier sandbox, but when you use Wish Hinder for a little bit and then you go back to another option like Revision 0 and you hit that Hunter's Trance shot and it doesn't one-shot the barrier natively, it feels really weird. And I'm thinking that will kind of bring this in balance with that a little bit more parity. So if you get that Hunter's Trace shot off, you get a crit on a barrier knightless, so to say. Fingers crossed that's going to one-shot the barrier down now, and then you'll be able to get theoretically 3 more shots, and then 2 more after that with your 4 times the charm procced up, plus your Vorpal, like Emphasis mentioned. Could be looking pretty hot next season.
There's sad Ariana's Vow noises in the background. What
is that, like an armor or something? Is that a Hunter armor helmet?
I heard about that.
What a big shame. Please buff Ariana's at some point. All right, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this episode. I'm going to pass it over to Impetus.
So we're going to start with the Moon Heist Battleground here. Do a little breakdown, build segment, starting off with what you need to know before you start working on your loadout here. We have two champion types, Barrier and Unstoppable. For Barrier, your artifact mod options are auto rifles and bows. In the sandbox, the elemental ability sandbox, the verbs Solar Radiant, Void Volatile rounds, and Strand Unravel rounds will affect Barrier champions. For Unstoppable champions in the artifact mod, we have fusion rifles and scout rifles. In the sandbox, you have Arc Blind, Solar Ignition, Stasis Shatter, and Strand Suspend to stun them. In this GM, we do have all three shields, Arc, Solar, and Void. You will experience mostly Arc shields. The main source of shields in general are Scorn Chieftains, but in the final room, all of the Scorn Chieftains that do spawn have Arc shields, and that's also the case for most of the Chieftains that spawn in the center room or the middle room as well. So there are all three, but it's mostly going to be Arc, and I think it's probably Solar would be the next common, and then Void the least common. Your activity modifiers. The overcharged weapon is going to be Sniper Rifle. I would say unless you're trying to do something really creative, you can probably avoid that one. The threat is Void. That is a 25% increase to incoming Void damage. There are some pretty big sources of Void damage that we'll get into in just a bit, but you absolutely want to be running Void Resistance on your chest piece. If you can get 2 times Void Resist, excellent, but you need at least 1 stack. It's going to hurt. The surges, rotating weekly, we have, when we did it, well, I guess it doesn't matter, because that will be in the past when this episode comes out. We're not quite sure what the ones are going to be for next season. They seem to be going through all the possible elements, but that is rotating on a weekly basis, so just double check that before you go in. The noteworthy and special enemies, we do have a Death Tongue Chorister. This is actually right at the start here. This is the earliest of all the available Death Tongue Chorister spawn points in the various heists that we have for GMs. If the totem that the Chorister is trying to reach is activated, the debuff Overwhelming Battle Song will be triggered, and you will be unable to cast your super, and your grenade and melee do not charge. So you want to kill that enemy quite quickly. There is a bit of I think there is a prompt that lets you know when it spawns in. The Chorister is a mini-boss, and it can be affected by crowd control effects like slowing, freezing, suspending, suppression, and blind. Use these tools to keep the Chorister away from that totem. The totem is a little bit further back in that opening encounter. It doesn't have a ton of health, but it is moving pretty much immediately on spawn to the totem, and it will take kind of a zigzagging path, so you do want to be aware of it when it comes in, and it will come in after there are several other high health targets like champions that have already spawned in and maybe engaging with you. So be aware of that, but it is right at the start there, right in that opening section. At the end of the opening section, you do have another special enemy, the Warmonger Knight. Really right just before you head down to the bunkers where this enemy spawns. It is a boss tier knight. Fairly easy to kill, but very dangerous at close range, so just stay back if possible. Chip it away, use a super if you have it. It will be one of the last enemies to spawn in. Moving on to the middle section where you will be protecting your ghost. We've got several abomination bosses that come in. These are all Scorn enemies in this section of the room. Again, a boss tier enemy. Fairly easy to kill. It's a very slow moving target, but it does have those lightning attacks. It's really the most lethal aspect is that it spawns in with a wave of ads, so there is a lot of incoming fire, so be aware of that. Definitely call out when it spawns in. Also in the Protect Ghost section, you have what is arguably, easily, the most dangerous enemy ever put in a GM, the Crossbow Scorns, which are mini-bosses, incredibly dangerous. They're assholes. They all have void crossbows that will one-shot you, even with full resilience and resists. You do need to be aware of them. When they spawn in that section, there will be a little icon above their head because they are the ones that will disrupt Ghost while he is chugging away at his little computer. So when they spawn in, they will immediately do their immune crawl teleport animation where they have blue smoke. They will pretty much show up right on top of the Ghost and immediately lock that down. again, how you want to handle these enemies when they first spawn in is up to your fire team, but they will probably most likely for all of you going into this show up in that middle section where they will just kind of hang out and stop ghost. Again, several of them do spawn in at a time, 2 to 3. Very, very dangerous. Again, they will one-shot you with the void crossbow, so you want to be dipping in and out of cover when you deal with them, or casting your super and dealing with them while you're in your super animation. But yes, these are the most lethal enemies. They spawn in clusters, and they are very, very hard to lock down as soon as they spawn in, so be aware of them. And then finally, the arc-shielded chieftains are in the boss room. You kill them to get the little ball that you dunk to eventually bring down the boss's shield. They are elites, so you can use on your legendary weapons the major spec, and they also can be affected by crowd control elements. They drop the arc bomb, and they do teleport. They're a little bit bulky, so just, take care with them, but you don't need to hide as much as with the crossbow scorn from the chieftains. The boss, of course, for this heist is Once Firus, the Exhumed Tether. Not too much of a threat. Doesn't have a ton of health, but does have that halfway point where they will go immune, and then you need to dunk the 5 arc bombs to bring down the shield. She can still one-shot you with her crossbow. That is also a void crossbow, but I'd say it fires it's noticeably slower than the standard crossbows that you would have just dealt with in the last room, and there's a really bright purple charging animation as well for that crossbow, so you have plenty of time if you see that she's aiming at you to get behind cover, duck, do whatever you need to do. But yes, still a one-shot, still a boss, but not a ton of health. She will teleport kind of on the different sides of the room. And there's plenty of cover in the boss room too as well, so even though she's very mobile, you should have a pretty easy time of taking cover and running away from her. Final notes here before we go into the recommended weapons. Starting location can be a little bit frustrating. You do have the Seraph Towers marking you pretty much right off the rip, as well as the waves of hives spawning in. There are a lot of elites and bulky minor tier adds like Abominations and Chieftains that are different from the Abominations and Chieftains that we just talked about in the special enemy section. There's, pretty much every special and normal type of enemy is covered in this GM. So you'll have a lot of success, and you also have a lot of struggle against various things in here. So just be aware of that. They're gonna throw a lot of enemies at you, especially in the middle room. But that's enough of me talking about what to expect. Let's talk about what you can bring in to counter all of these options here. Starting with primaries, Saint, what are we recommending for exotic and legendary primaries?
We got a few staples on the anti-barrier side. You've got Quicksilver Storm that's going to be able to put out a significant amount of damage. It's overcharged. You have the Niamuda Tracer Rockets origin trait is buffed up by the artifact this season if you have that active. And you got that, anti-barrier always added in. The grenade shots make for really nice just burst damage and quick work of those barriers as well if you land a nice direct shot. Also have Wish Ender. Can't deny it is a go-to for a reason, the standard of anti-barrier weapons pretty much with intrinsic ability. On the legendary side, auto rifles, kind of mid-range stuff. You've got a Sweet Sorrow, Rufus's Fury, maybe not quite as much range, but still going to be pretty solid. And if you do want to use something like a scout rifle for unstoppable, Hung Jury, Doom, or Tarnished Metal are some solid options. Going into your special weapons, if you want to mix things up a little bit, if you're using a scout maybe in your energy slot, we've also got Arbalest for a little more damage, and those nice one-shot barrier takedowns, as well as in line with Wish Ender. And then fusion rifles for unstop, Loaded Question, Nox Perennial, Riptide, all going to be good options. Any fusion that you bring in is going to be overcharged thanks to that modifier, but really strong stuff here. As far as the heavy weapons go, generally I'm leaning towards rockets or something that I can get a quick, burst shot off with. There are a lot of things that you could dip into as far as like controlling the room and things like that if you're going to leave your exotic slot open, but I still feel like it's hard to beat an on-element singed rocket or burn rocket to be able to just deal some really quick chunk damage. And yeah, you've always got wave frames. There's definitely going to be some areas that are divided up by stairs maybe, but are going to have big, nice swaths of open space for just clearing out enemies, your explosive personality, your forbearance, whatever that may be. Always good options. Gonna have a bit of a mix of that kind of range and close range, depending on where you're at in this GM. And you can, generally speaking, control the range at which you want to engage these enemies from. Not too many instances where you're going to be stuffed right up next to the enemies, even though that middle arena can feel a little claustrophobic at times, depending on where the enemies are spawning and where you and your squad mates are held up at. When we're looking at artifact mods, this is generally going to be the same for both the GMs that we talk about today. There are a lot of elemental, like tangle, type of mods, related things that are going to be really good for just keeping your tangle cooldowns down and generating ammo and things like that if you're going to be going on strand. And then we also have elemental embrace if you are on a void subclass and you have a devour or other, buff up devour, specifically giving you that 50% DR to void attacks and 50 recovery, because basically the way that elemental embrace works is when you have a buff on related to a specific element, you get a massive 50% DR for incoming damage of that element. So not only is devour going to keep you alive, but now it's giving you even past woven mail levels of damage reduction and +5 tiers of recovery, which is just absolutely insane. And I think that just might play into this class that Court is about to recommend. Court?
Yes, for my hunter friends. It's a similar build if you've listened to our previous activity and build breakdowns. This is the Deadfall Tether with Orpheus Rigs. Grenades going to be Vortex. Cast your mind back to last episode where we were going down the whole list of grenades, and Vortex was the one that kept coming out as the strongest, so we're going to go with that one. Obviously, Snare Bomb for the melee, and Gamblers for the class ability. So, every time I say this, I get some kind of perplexed, I assume faces, but definitely their voices are like, you were using what? I was using Queensbreaker's, Queensbreaker. I know. It's definitely a weapon in this game, but I wasn't using it for damage. I wasn't using it because there's some cheeky little kind of thing. I'm using it purely because of that blind. So the intrinsic wire rifle fires a long-range precision arc bolt that chains to nearby targets and blinds them on hits, and that blinding is very, very powerful, especially in these type of battlegrounds where there's just a ton of ads everywhere. So that blind can softly kind of chain around. If you're pairing this with a jolt weapon as well, or if you're applying jolt and then firing Queensbreaker, you can just really do some serious damage, serious utility. So I was using that here when we were doing the GM today, just before we started recording. Arc Surge was also the activity surge along with Strand. So I was synergizing that with Iterative Loop as my fusion rifle and Rufus's Fury as my auto rifle, just to kind of really exploit the amount of damage I'm getting from the surges. In terms of aspects, Vanishing Step is pretty much a must. That's your kind of get out of jail kind of card here. And then you can either go for Stylus Executioner or Trapper's Ambush. The reason why I'm saying or is because in previous builds, I would kind of shove off Trapper's Ambush because I'm not really playing into the sort of Omnioculus build here. But now that Trapper's Ambush is a 2 fragment slot along with Stylish and Vanishing Step, it's really up to you. So if you want to go kind of a more solo route where you are the only one getting invis, or if you want to cast your allies in invis, then Trapper's Ambush is your go-to. And that does affect our fragments here. So Echoes of Starvation is your orb or breach, void breach. Gives you Devour. which is where Saints kind of looping back into Elemental Embrace for Season 22. You do get that minus 10 recovery. Next up is Vigilance, where when you're at low health and you make a kill, you get Avoid Overshields. That's kind of, again, another kind of get out of jail free card. You still get that minus 10 recovery. Not that it matters when you're getting that plus 50 from Elemental Embrace. Next up, we've got Remnants, which obviously gives Vortex a much longer lasting duration. And the fourth slot is really up to you. So I was using in the build, the run we're doing today, I was doing Undermining, which is Void Grenades Weaken, because I was using Sightless Executioner. So I was getting that invis proc pretty much all the time when I'm getting the Void Grenade Weaken and then killing them. Persistence to get that longer Devour plus invis plus overshield, or you can go down the route of Harvest, which has been, it was changed a few updates ago. I think it was last season, where killing weakened targets spawns an orb plus a Void Breach. It's no longer got that precision kill trigger that it used to have. It's just killing any weakened targets. So if you want to let your fire team members feast on orbs, then that's your ticket there. For specific mods for Helm, Siphon, and Finder and Scout was what I was using. Arms, I had Firepower for that orb and grenade kill. Chest is, well, obviously I am a big kind of proponent for using other chest mods, but not in this GM. You are picking resists and only resists. We'll talk about the other Grandmaster where I will not suggest resists and rather reserves, but yeah. It has to be resist, void resist plus, either 3 void resists or 2 plus concussive or 2 plus sniper, just to really kind of avoid that almost one-shot kill when you're using Elemental Embrace as well. For legs, obviously your orb pickup mods, whatever really suits you here, and then Reaper for your class ability. So yeah, your job here as the resident Orpheus Riggs Night Stalker Hunter is just to create orbs, have that tether up all the time, and obviously the utility. Again, you could utilize Omnioculus plus Trappers here. That 50% DR for you and your teammates when you're invis is very helpful, but I think just because of the nature of this Grandmaster Battleground, the tight arenas, the rooms, I've just found having near constant tether just the best way to burst down groups of ads and bulky mini bosses. These guys will obviously, attest to that as well. Like, just having constant orbs spawning to feed my tether back up to full. If you get that tether on a really great spot, you're going to get that 50% super generation back. In terms of other builds, you could go for the Frozen Battlefield, is what I call the Stasis Dustfield Renewals Chains build, and you can also go for the Strand Suspend build, which, yeah, it has lost a little bit of potency due to the Suspend nerfs. I think this could still be useful, being able to kind of do AoE Suspend with Shackle × 2 with Widow's Silk, Ensnaring Slam, and obviously warding for the Woven Mail from orbs. It can be used there, but I think ultimately Tether is your go-to here. I'll pass it over to Mr. Titan over here, who is going to suggest some builds himself for the Titans.
Yeah, we'll start off on an arc build. We were talking last week about just how strong pulse grenades are. If you've got arc on the rotator here, this is definitely something to consider. Starting off, we do have that pulse grenade for just its duration, its total damage output, and its ionic trace generation. I'm going to be pairing Armamentarium with this, which is not something that gets recommended a ton. This has been something that I had been messing around with a little bit for a few weeks, and then I saw a video come out from Plunder That Booty, aka Plunder, over on YouTube, and he added a few things onto this that I think really take it up a notch. So shout out to him for that, for kind of just closing out the loop here on what really brings this build together. You're going to be using Touch of Thunder and Juggernaut for your aspects, and then on fragments we have Shock for the grenade jolting, Magnitude for the duration, and Ions for our traces, and then resistance for that extra DR. The mods that we're going to use here are going to be completely focused around how can I just keep my grenade uptime as high as absolutely possible. This is going to be really important when you are in situations where you have very big, like kind of dense groups of enemies, which is going to happen at several points when you're doing your Protect the Ghost section, the opening section. Even a lot of these areas, you are going to have big chunks of dense enemies, and this is going to allow you to do a lot of damage in an AoE and jolt them, chain that jolting to everything around them. Just really strong. For our mod set, we're going to start off with Grenade Kickstart and Bolstering Detonation, as well as Firepower on our arms. So this is allowing us to use our charge rather than on maybe a weapon damage boost or some of the things like that, just purely on getting that grenade back as quickly as possible, just stacking on top to that generation we're getting from our Ionic Traces in the first place. And of course, Firepower allowing us to make orbs, which feeds into what we're using on our legs. Chest piece is going to be charged up so we can hold up to 4 stacks, as well as just resist of your choice. Legs, stacks on stacks, and elemental charge for getting multiple charges per event there. And then Reaper Bomber and distribution on your class item. This is just kind of circumventing the need for something like Heart of Inmost Light, because there's so much here that is feeding back into that grenade regeneration and allow you to just do an insane amount of damage and an insane amount of uptime on those pulse grenades. The other build that I recommend that's been a bit of a go-to for me this season is the Strand Fletched Storm Banner of War combo. This is basically centered around focusing on proccing Banner of War from a distance via Fletched Storm as much as possible, and then keeping that up for as long as you can. Be using usually Shackle Grenade on this, and then Heart of Inmost Light is going to come back here for the damage increase that I can get on my melee by just throwing my barricade, or 35% by using my barricade and then grenade, and then using my melee is going to be a 35% there. For weapon of choice, we mentioned Wishender earlier, which is a favorite, but also Monte Carlo is an option if you want even higher melee uptime. On the fragments, we've got Isolation, Transmutation, Warding, and then Generation. This is really focused about giving us a little bit of woven mail uptime, allowing for some debuffing of targets via Isolation, and then we're going to use our mod set to just double down on this even further. A hands-on my helmet, heavy-handed momentum transfer and impact induction on my arms, recuperation, and probably a surge mod and a scab mod on my boots, and then bomber, outreach, and distribution on my class item. What you want to do here again is cast your barricade, cast your Fletched Storm, proc your Banner of War, and then be next to your allies, be near your allies, be providing that healing, using your Monte Carlo to stun champions, get your Fletched Storm back up so you can be re-procking that when it falls off, and keeping that Banner of War up from a distance. Incredibly strong defensive loadout here. Impetus, I'm going to hand it over to you. What's going on with the Warlocks?
Yeah, I've been struggling to kind of think of what's the best option here. I think I'd have to give it to Void, but I do also want to shout out an Arc build and a Stasis build. I did use the Stasis build in the run that we did just before recording the episode, and I did okay, but I think Void is probably going to be the way to go. I will wait to do the Void one until last, though, so let's talk about Arc and then Stasis here. For the Arc subclass, the real reason I want to do or bring this to your attention is really just to pass off Arc Souls to your fire team, and then also generate ability energy through Ionic Trace spam. So Superhero Chaos Reach will use Storm Grenades, Melee will be Chain Lightning, Healing Rift, of course. We're going to use Fallen Sunstar for the exotic armor, and then I'm going to pair that with Cold Heart as my exotic weapon of choice. My aspects will be Arc Soul, of course, and then Electrostatic Mind for easy ionic trace generation. And then the fragments that I'm rocking with here, my 4 are a Spark of Shock for my grenades to jolt, which will be really powerful in these smaller areas, especially in the opening section when a lot of enemies will spawn around those hive cryptoliths. And then, of course, when we get into the middle room, you have the enemies kind of funneling in through those 4 doors at the back. And then, of course, when they spawn in the upper back platform in the boss room, this will be a great place for a jolting grenade to be thrown right as they're spawning in to really lock down, shut down that entire wave. Spark of Beacon is my next one. Arc Special Weapons Blind on kill. Again, lifesaver right here. I'm recommending Cold Heart for the exotic weapon of choice. If you want to use a different Arc Special Weapon, Loaded Question, for example, another great option there. Your call. Spark of Magnitude, storm grenades are going to last longer. That's just going to be really great for keeping an area denied from the enemy. And then Spark of Amplitude, rapid kills while amplified, create Orb of Power. That's going to be great for getting my super back even faster, as well as any other effects that I have tied to my Orb of Power. On my specific mods here, Ashes to Assets and the Helm. Arms, I'm going Firepower, Impact Induction, and Fastball. On the chest, Void Resistance for sure, Concussive Resist if you really want. That middle room, enemies can get pretty close to you in the middle room and in the final room. You may want to consider Melee Resistance. Again, that's based on a distance, not the actual act of melee. It's your call here. Concussive will still be helpful, of course, for any grenades that are being thrown at you, and there will be quite a few different types of grenades being thrown at you. So your call there. Void Resistance is not up for negotiation. That is an absolute must. Legs, I went with Recuperation, Innervation, and Better already for those Orbs of Power that I'm generating through the Spark of Amplitude and my Amplified kills. Class item, I went Time Dilation, Bomber, and Outreach. For specific weapons, again, Arc Special Weapon, pretty much going to need to be a must if you're going to run beacons, and I think you should be running beacons. The blind is extremely helpful. Again, Court was using an exotic weapon for that blinding effect, but nonetheless, it was a lifesaver and did mitigate a lot of threats while we were trying to deal with that middle room for the first time. So I do think Spark of Beacons is a must if you're going to be on an Arc subclass and you really want to lock down areas without having to throw a grenade or a melee necessarily. Whatever Arc Special Weapon you want to use is up to you, of course. Forbearance, Cold Heart, Loaded Question, all going to be great options. Those are just the top 3 that come to my mind, but you're welcome to try other things if you so desire. We'll go over to Stasis now. Unsurprisingly, we're going to be using turrets, lock them down, and that was quite effective in the run for keeping enemies at bay, keeping them not moving, really making them obvious, because again, once they're frozen, they do get that highlight effect on them. Where the build was struggling was I did not have a lot of healing and support, and so I was getting gunned down pretty quickly if I was out of position. And again, it was my first time going through this on this particular difficulty, so I was out of position quite a lot. I think with some more practice, I could probably stay alive a little bit, but I have absolutely no health. I do have the Whisper of Rhyme, where stasis shards grant an overshield, but it's just a bit of overshield. It's not a full overshield as we can get on Void, so you would have needed a lot of shards to generate, and I could generate a few, but again, those were typically grouped around where enemies were or enemies still were currently, and I just killed some of the minor enemies around them, so it wasn't necessarily safe to go and pick up those shards in the moment that I would need them the most. So just be aware of that if you want to run stasis. It did work. You can have success with it, but it is you're going to want to be pretty familiar with this activity and the various spaces if you're using this build. Winter's Wrath Super, Cold Snap Grenades, Penumbral Blast, Healing Rift, Osmiomancy Gloves are the important parts here. Aspects being Bleak Watcher and Glacial Harvest. I was using the Whisper of Conduction, where stasis shards track to me. Whisper of Durance, where my slow effect lasts longer. That's what makes my turrets so powerful. And then Whispers of Torment and Rhyme Torment, where I gain grenade energy when I take damage. That was certainly coming into play a lot, although sometimes I would find myself dead right after taking that damage. So the extra grenade energy was really only useful after either Saint or Court had come to revive me. And then Rhyme, of course, for that small bit of overshield. Again, it's nice, but it's pretty much immediately stripped, as well as the rest of my shields and health in this GM. So maybe look to a different Whisper, but that has been quite useful in other activities. It's just that there are so many enemies, particularly in the middle room, that I think this Whisper of Rhyme maybe starts to get overwhelmed a little bit in its utility function. I don't know. I might have to run it a bit more before I can kind of decide if I want to swap to a different Whisper, but those are the 4 that I was using. In terms of my mods here, Grenade Kickstart, Impact Induction on the arms, Helmet is kind of your call if you want to do Ashes to Assets. You're not killing a ton of enemies necessarily with the grenade there. This is more about damage rather than lethality. So I kind of stocked up on heavy ammo spawner and finder. Arms, I said Grenade Kickstart, Impact Induction. Chests, again, Void Resistance for sure, and then melee or concussive dampener. Legs, better, recuperation and better already. And then class, Bomber. For special or specific weapons of note, Riptide with Chill Clip would have been something that I definitely would have preferred to take in. I was using Quicksilver Storm for the utility and the grenade for barrier champions, but I think Riptide, really anything with Chill Clip, Riptide's still probably the best, would be a great pairing there. I would not run Augur Scepter. Using the Winter's Wrath Super was really effective in that center room, especially when I needed to go pick up a res or clear out those crossbow scorn chieftains that were hanging out, or snipers, I should say, that were hanging out next to the ghost to kind of free that area up and then help jumpstart the activity again. So that's Stasis. I do think, though, for this season, the absolute best option to run would be a Void subclass. Vortex Nova Bomb for the Super, Vortex Grenade for the reasons that I did list it in the previous episode, but yes, Vortex Grenade is going to be very, very strong here, and we're going to be pairing that with Controverse Holds for the best possible version of a Vortex Grenade. Melee is going to be Pocket Singularity, and again, Healing for the class ability. On my aspects, I'm running Feed the Void and Chaos Accelerant. For my fragments, I'm running the Echo of Undermining so that my supercharged Vortex Grenade now weakens. I am running Remnants so that that grenade lasts longer. I'm running Persistence so that my Devour lasts longer. And then I'm running Expulsion, where my ability kills create void explosions. This is all about really aggressive crowd control. I think it will be quite strong here. In my mods on my helm, Ashes to Assets is the obvious choice here. You're going to get a lot of super energy from a well-placed supercharged Vortex Grenade. On the arms, Firepower and Fastball. On the chest, the exact same setup that I've recommended for the Arc and Stasis ones. On the legs, Recuperation and Better Already, and then class, Bomber. Really, really, really want to get those grenades going as much as possible. And remember, with the artifact mod Elemental Embrace, as long as you have Devour, you will have 50% void damage reduction plus 5 tiers of recovery that will take you up to tier 10 at max there. So you are still going to die to enemies. Don't think that 50% void damage reduction isn't giving you enough cover to not be one shot, right? But you will be able to at least survive all of the other void damage that you'll be taking, and there's going to be a ton of it from grenades and all the other Scorn enemies out there. Do note, though, that Elemental Embrace is on a timer, so if you refresh Devour, Elemental Embrace will not refresh. It will go all the way down, and then it will reset the timer as long as Devour is active again and refreshed again when it's not up. So not going to be a problem for Warlocks because we can get Devour up pretty much consistently, keep refreshing that, but just be aware that Elemental Embrace does not refresh on a Devour refresh. For specific weapons, I think anything with Repulsor Brace and Golden Tricorn is going to be great. Again, one of the reasons I run Echo of Undermining is so that Repulsor Brace will kick in when I kill an enemy with my supercharged Vortex Grenade because it's applying Weaken. Golden Tricorn, of course, would be another great damage option just to make sure that my weapons are doing as much damage as possible. You'd want to make sure that's Golden Tricorn on a Void weapon. Beyond that, though, I do think this is probably all around the best thing that we have. You're going to be lethal. You're going to have Devour up, so you'll be getting health. If you have Repulsor Brace, you'll be getting that Void Overshield. And you're going to be getting some DR, even if you can't have Repulsor Brace, through the Elemental Embrace artifact mod. So lots of different options there. I think you'll have enough success on Void. Let's move over to activity pain points and good to know. Court, what did we struggle with in our run of this GM?
Oh, our only run of this GM, probably until it comes back again. So really, the starting encounter was a bit chaotic, but I think we could really tidy it up if we were to play this again, just to kind of really refine it. But it's the middle encounter, the Protect Ghost room, which is just a huge pain in the ass. There's just a lot going on here. Again, this is something that I think the community's kind of been fairly sentimental about in terms of feedback, and this is just a bit kind of too much going on here. But so you will need pinpoint crowd control and communication here. The ad waves combined with the unstoppable scorn, plus the mini-boss crossbores that will one-shot you. They're going to swarm you. You do not want to be in that room whatsoever. So we recommend you using the entry door and the hallway as your, quote, safe zone. So retreat back here when the room gets too hot to handle. We were doing that. We're just kind of going in, bursting a bunch of ads, then retreating back to the safe zone and just keep repeating that. Ghosts will get interrupted all the time, so we will recommend a high DR Guardian or an Invis Hunter to safely reactivate Ghost. And the last point here that we wanted to raise is we're not 100% sure how or what is triggering the ad waves. The waves seem to be based on just a general timer, and the quality of said ads is based on how far the ghost has progressed. So we were like over 60 or 70%, and we had the big ogre spawn. The abomination, the boss tier abomination spawn 2 or 3 times. So we're not entirely sure what exactly is causing them to keep spawning. So it's just a really tricky encounter to deal with. So this room in particular is why we recommend, void resist, concussive dampener. If you're on a void subclass and you're using Devour, then obviously utilize that artifact mod as well. And really, it's just a lot of communication. If you want, this is a GM that you kind of have to synergize with your squad, with your fire team. Who's doing what role? Who's going to be on, say, a Void Hunter, a Stasis Hunter? Who's going to be on Void Warlock? Who's going to be on Strand Titan? It's a tough one. Really is a tough nut to crack. We almost fell at that stage, but we kind of really got our put down our kind of casual kind of perspective when it comes to these GMs and really kind of focused on it, and we did manage to clear it. But the middle one is definitely the encounter, which is very painful.
Yeah, shout out Woven Mail,
Yeah.
Shout out to Taylor.
Yeah.
In terms of what time can our team expect to complete, so I'm just looking at gm.report and looking at our run. It was 32 minutes and 20 seconds. Again, we were very fresh, so I could maybe see that going down to 25 minutes maybe if we were really focusing at the start and the middle encounter. And the most taxing sort of arena or encounter for this is definitely that middle room. I think that's just it's completely random how that room's going to be. Again, as I mentioned, we could really refine the boss room, definitely the boss room, and definitely the starting encounter on the surface of the moon. But once you're in that bunker, oh boy. Final thoughts here really is I'm actually looking at gm.report and didn't realize how comprehensive this breakdown is. I'm looking at kills and assists and deaths from the 3 of us. The only thing it's not listing here is orbs of power, but it is listing our score. I was at 765,000 score. Impetus was 531,000 and Saint was 365. And I'm just a quick statistic before I hand it off to you guys. I was looking at the super kills. It tracks how many kills you made with a super. I got 8, which is fine. But we look over at Saint and Impetus, who are obviously using more aggressive supers. 30 for Saint and 20 for impetus, the super kills, which makes a lot of sense. Just tethering a bunch of ads and then you guys go ham on them. So, any closing thoughts for this GM?
Not fun, man. I'm sorry. Like, I don't want... This is not a farmable GM at all. We've got Loaded Question was this past week, and yeah, I'd probably do pretty much any of the other ones over this. Like, Lightblade would be easier to go and get Loaded Questions than doing this, because that middle room is... I mean, I guess it's designed in such a way that you can be as aggressive as you want with your fire team, but the mix of enemy types is just so much. And you're in such a small space, and again, on Grandmaster difficulty, you're just taking a ridiculous amount of damage that you really cannot, at a certain point, you just can't mitigate at all. And Scorn are the worst enemies, man. I mean, they spawn in through the entry doors, you get to see them, and then they immediately go into that travel mode where they're untouchable. They do their personal weave walk, basically, where you just have to wait for them to come out before you can damage, and then they're already in a different spot. It can be difficult to keep track of them when there's multiple ones going through that blue smoke. Not enjoyable. Not enjoyable at all. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll help some other people run through it and I have a different opinion, but my first impressions are quite negative, unfortunately.
Yeah, the immunity phases of all the ads, that's just not it. You are in a situation where you need to, if you're going to really get this time down and prevent Ghost from being interrupted, having the ads around you also be able to just randomly go immune is really frustrating to deal with if you're trying to get those times down. So, yeah, similar to Impetus, a little frustrating in the first clear. Probably going to try to get those times down. Definitely have a few more friends that are going to be looking around out there. Conqueror Guild as we move towards the end of the season.
All right, well, on to our next GM here is the European one, the Heist Battleground Europa. I think out of the three this season, it's probably the best one, I would maybe be inclined to say. Maybe not for farming, but the sort of easiest quote. So yeah, we'll give this a little cover. We've already done the Mars one. We did that a couple seasons back. I think at the start of Lightfall, we covered that. So yeah, Europa is up next. So champions, we of course have Barrier and Unstoppable, so the exact same mods and sandbox effects. That's Auto Rifle Bow for Barrier, Unstoppable, Fusion Rifle, and Scout Rifle. And of course Sandbox Solar Radiant, Void Volatile rounds, Strand Unravel rounds, and Unstoppable's got Arc Blind, it's Solar Ignition, Stasis Shatter, and Strand Suspend. We've got three shields again, Arc, Solar, and Voids. And the activity modifiers are as follows. We've got Overcharged Linear Fusion Rifles. For the threat, it's Solar, 25% increase to incoming solar damage. And again, we're not entirely sure how the surges are rotating right now, so it's just take that into consideration. Again, this week we were playing with Arc and Strand. It may be completely different when we eventually get to it. In terms of the noteworthy and special enemies, quite a few here. We've got Once Ezrix, the retainer to Xivu Arath. The location is the main Bray Exoscience room. That's basically the big room that you enter as soon as you get into the Exoscience. It spawns at the back of the room with a wave of ads. Again, this is a boss. It does have the icon of a mini boss, which is we've seen combatants before having incorrect iconography, but that's not correct. Once Ezrix is a boss here, you can't CC, but I mean, to be honest, not very tanky. It's not really significant, but it is required to be killed to progress to the next stage. We of course have the Death Tongue choristers again. This is at the robotics bay, so when you're kind of going further into the deep of the heart of the Bray building. Once again, it's a mini boss. If you get that totem activated, it spawns the nearby Shrieker sentries, and of course you get that overwhelming battle song debuff. So you're unable to cast your super, your grenade and melees do not charge, and as we've mentioned before, the Chorister is a mini-boss, so is affected by crowd control like slow, freeze, suspend, suppression, and blind. Use them, very important, especially in this Grandmaster, because you are at such a long range. We'll get into a little bit more of that later on. We've got the Cryptolith Keeper Wizards. There's 3 at the Clovis Room, the big head. Again, these are mini-bosses. You've got... you do need to kill them to progress into the bunker, and they can be pretty frustrating to deal with because, wizards are always agile, they're moving around, they're pretty difficult to track, they're, thin bodies, so it's a small hitbox at longer ranges. But yeah, again, they can be crowd controlled, so use that at your advantage. We've got the Arc Shielded Captains for this, again, in the boss room. Elites for major spec, can be crowd controlled, and again, just like with the chieftains, these are the ones that drop the arc ball that you're to use to trigger the next phase of the boss. Again, captains, fallen captains, they teleport a lot more frequently than the chieftains, and they are pretty bulky, so just take your in consideration with these combatants. And finally, we've got the War Watcher. It's the Eye of Xivu Arath, and we've finally got an actual Shrieker from all the way back since Savathun's Song. That was a great boss. Nice to see a Shrieker as a boss again. So yeah, the main boss of the background. Its void tracking seekers can be a big pain. We recommend going to the right of the arena underneath the raised platform as you come into that boss room. As this is a Shrieker, it does count as a vehicle, or as I call it when I was doing my Hake Breach Armaments breakdown, I call it an automaton. It is therefore affected by Hake Breach Armaments weapons with a 49% damage increase. Shriekers and Cyclops take vehicle and turret multipliers together, so you get that combination. So take that into consideration with your weapons. In terms of recommended weapons, lads, what are we recommending here? Probably going to be the same. Quicksilver Storm for that grenades, anti-barrier, burst kind of utility. We've got Wishender, obviously auto rifles, like Rufus's Fury, Sweet Sorrow, Scout Rifles, Unstoppable, Arbalist, Fusion Rifles for the Unstoppable, Loaded Question, Nox Perennial, Riptide. Waveframe's obviously going to be very good here again. Any other kind of suggestions? I know you guys have already got some suggestions within your builds, but any general suggestions? I would say Leviathan's Breath. I was using that in the a couple of runs as well. We didn't mention that for the Moon Battleground, but that would probably be pretty good there. But any general recommendations here?
I think there's still that bug where if you want your linear to apply unstop, then you also need to be using a fusion in your energy slot has been a thing.
Yeah, that's still a thing.
You can kind of capitalize on that though. If you're willing to invest a little bit and use, you could use maybe a slightly shorter range fusion, some kind of rapid fusion, and then you can pair that with the linear of your choice. I know Storm Chaser, is a go-to. So I think that's a pretty viable option. It gives you something to deal with enemies, maybe a little more up close, and then you've got your linear to really stun enemies from a distance. So I think that I was using like Iterative Loop with Volt Shot, and then I had a Storm Chaser for my distance weapon, which actually like played out really nicely for being able to deal with some groups of enemies, deal with some stun, some unstops at range, and deal damage at range is definitely something I would keep an open mind to.
Yeah, if you can, if you ever get the opportunity to run 1K voices inside of a Grandmaster Nightfall, you definitely want to take that opportunity at least once. So as long as you use a fusion rifle in your energy slot, go crazy with 1K. Just don't blow yourself up or, hit the back of your teammate's head and cause some unintended consequences. Could also do Sleeper Simulant if you want to have a really fun run. I wish we probably would have gone triple sleeper instead of Vex Mythic class, but hey, that is don't bring Vex Mythic class, by the way, in case that wasn't obvious. That is not a fusion rifle that you do want to use in here, despite the fact that it gets that unstoppable synergy. That was not the play. You gotta wait a little bit longer to use that, but yeah, I think I brought a machine gun in and that was fine, but you could totally get away with using a linear fusion rifle in here with the overcharge and the additional unstop if you want to take advantage of that bug.
Yeah, I was using Queensbreaker once again,
Right.
much to the scaring of these two lads, because apparently when you fire it, it sounds exactly like, well, obviously because it's the exact same weapon that the Fallen use, but it was certainly scaring a bunch of people when I was using it. Twofold, because it's like, why are you using Queensbreaker? But also this thing is really loud. Yeah, Queensbreaker once again is my recommendation. Again, it doesn't matter if it's Arc Surge or not. I think just with the utility of just being able to blind things, and that loops me back into the recommendation I'm going to give for my fellow hunters. I am going to obviously recommend Void that I've already talked about. I won't go into too much. I won't go into any detail because I've already broke that down on the previous Battleground here. That's obviously your Deadfall Tether, Orpheus Regs. But for Arc Hunters, I think this is a really kind of fertile ground to really exploit jolting. So obviously Gathering Storm, Skip Grenades, Disorienting Blow, Gambler's Dodge, and Shinobu's Vow. Aspects, Flow State, Tempest Strike. Tempest Strike is, I often get kind of questions why I use Tempest Strike. I think because I'm not using Combination Blow, I don't really need to play into the whole kind of self synergy with that particular aspect, Flow State, and the names completely went out my head.
Combination Blow? Flow State and Combination Blow?
No, sorry, Lethal Current is what I was thinking. Don't really see much. I don't see much use in using that. So Tempest Strike is more of your applying jolt from a longer range. My other builds, which are featured on the Destiny Massive Breakdowns Discord server, they go into more of that kind of combination blow plus Liar's Handshake. Maybe not so useful in a GM, but certainly I do have builds for that. In terms of sparks or fragments here, we've got Amplitude. You get lots of orbs, 10-second cooldown. Discharge for that Ionic Trace on arc weapon kills, -10 strength. Ions, which is jolted enemies spawn an on Ionic Trace, which is again another 10-second cooldown. And of course, Shock for grenades jolting, and that's a -10 discipline. For helmet mods, we've got Arc Siphon mods, and of course, Ashes to Assets. Imtus already kind of covered the kind of utility when it comes to Ashes to Assets for some of his builds in the previous GM. For arms, we've got Firepower, obviously. Lots more orb spawning here. We've got Grenade Kickstart. For chest and legs, it's really free picks here. I kind of alluded to this in the last GM. You can go resist. Resist is definitely useful, but there's not a lot of things that are going to one-shot you here. You know, obviously it's a GM, so you want to be safe rather than, sorry here. But this is where I'd kind of recommend maybe getting one of those reserve mods in, especially for Queensbreaker. Queensbreaker's got a fair, it's got a fair magazine, it's got a fair reserve count, but just being able to bump that up to get just more blind shots is very good. Very good here. Alternatively, you could go for Charged Up, which then kind of loops back into Grenade Kickstart. For legs, Stacks and Stacks or Arc Surges, though if you are using Arc Surges, Kickstart mods do cannibalize the stacks. Just take that into consideration. So you might not be using quite a lot of both at the same time. Just with the nature of Shinobu's Vow as well, you've got your 2 skip grenades, you're throwing them all the time. You just might not have much utility with Arc Surges, so that's there if you're not really throwing grenades a lot. Otherwise, Stacks and Stacks is my choice here. And rounding off for the class is Reaper and Bomber for obvious reasons. Specific weapons, so I've got a little bit more of a kind of curated list here. So I was using Sweet Sorrow, which is the Sofa Roll. That's your stats for all and one for all. Sweet Sorrow, Season 16, Witch Queen, Risen Weapon, solid weapon. It's one of my favorite auto rifles at the moment because it's got that sofa roll. It's got the land tank origin trait. It's just such a jack of all trades weapon here. Really great, especially when you do have that Arc Surge. But even without Arc Surge, it just do really well, obviously, with your synergy with the Arc Hunter build here. Saint's already talked about Outer Loop. I would also recommend that here as well. I've got the Lead from Gold Volt Shot roll, and for heavy, in terms of other weapons, you've got the Icolos SMG, you've got Posterity, you've got Oversoul Edict for this season with Crota's End, Song of Uryu again, and for exotics, if you're not using Queensbreaker, you've got Cold Heart and Centrifuge. So really just thinking about all those arc weapons to synergize here. And yeah, my little comment here is feast on all the orbs. These guys always kind of wonder where I'm getting all the orbs to spawn, and this is the build. This is the build to get those orbs to spawn. Just got so many things that are going to spawn orbs and trigger kind of loop back into, I'm going to throw my grenade, kill them, spawn an orb. These guys get their super back faster. They can charge into the strand with warding, getting your woven mail, various other kind of effects with like leg armor mods as well. So this is the build. I was having a lot of fun with this. It's the GM itself isn't as complex in terms of difficulty compared to the Moon one, but yeah, still need to be careful, which is why I also recommend the Void subclass that I've already talked about. All right, Saint, I only see one build here. What are you recommending for the Titans?
Yeah, this is going to be kind of a riff on the Strand build that I recommended before. You already know it's Banner of War. It's just way too good to ignore. Something I mentioned, I think, in the grenade episode, last episode, is the addition that this gives you to your melee damage of almost 40%. Instead of Fletched Storm, we can swap that out a little bit for our other aspect into the Fray, which is going to allow us a much higher uptime on Woven Mail. So a lot of this is going to play into similar fragments from before: isolation, transmutation, warding, and generation. Isolation also pairs really nicely with something like Rapid Fire Ranger, a artifact mod that we have at the moment that will weaken your targets when you hit multiple crits in a row from range. If you're using, let's say, Wishender, Iterative Loop, and Storm Chaser, it is going to be really easy for you to proc it on Storm Chaser itself off of a stun or landing multiple follow-up shots, because you're going to have so much of that time where you're far away from enemies. And then same thing with Wishender, really easy to proc that. And then you've got Iterative Loop to kind of clear out the rooms and stun those champs as well if you need extra backup, or if you're in those little closer range scenarios. Something that you can also throw into this mix, though, is Synthesephs. Synthesephs is crazy strong for not only your super, but again, when you're pairing that with the Banner of War melee increase, you add on Synthesephs for the 3 times melee increase. On top of that, you have Into the Fray giving you this Woven Mail all the time, which allows you to, it kind of enables this really aggressive playstyle, right? You also have let's say you've got Court on your fire team that is triggering you, but at the same time blinding enemies everywhere. Again, makes it really easy to get up in there with your melee abilities and just slay out on some of those enemies. You could be, again, using Monte Carlo. I think that there are some ways, like we mentioned, some of those other mods that you can slot into your subclass to maybe make up for that a little bit. Melee kickstarts the various armor and leg pieces, class item pieces that are allowing you to regenerate your abilities via your other abilities and kind of chain those together. So not super necessary to have something like Monte Carlo, but it is an option. Just keep in mind that you will be giving up a little bit of range there. You can also go all the way into something like a 1-2 punch shotgun if you want to run a shackle grenade that will suspend enemies. This is really only good for close range though, and I think there's going to be a lot of scenarios where you're fighting from a pretty far distance in this fight. So this loadout is kind of all about using the debuff from the artifact and the your aspects and your debuff from the artifact to fight at range with your range weapons. And then when you get up close, you've got Synthesephs, into the Fray, Banner of War up to fight up close. So a bit of a balance there. Isolation, was the fragment that I was going to mention that is getting that severing burst off of targets when you land multiple crits. So yeah, a bit of range and then some really aggressive play once you get into that boss room where you're really going to be able to capitalize on having Woven Mail uptime. It's going to make the running back and forth to deposit the orbs in the middle of that arena pretty trivial, honestly. It's just really low risk when you get so much of this healing up at the same time. That's pretty much it.
And Synthos are getting a buff next season. Getting your
getting threat detector, right?
Oh my god,
threat detector just built into it. But also glaives, as we already know, are getting the buffs. So like if you're a glaive using Strand Titan, yeah, there you go.
If you ever thought, 40% DR added on to my tier 10 resilience is good, but what if we could get that up to like 99% DR? Just pull out a glaive, you're good to go.
Yeah, that's so cool, man. I'm so happy you guys have great builds over there on Titan. Keep doing you. Stares at Starfire Protocol. Young Ahamkar Spine. All right, let's talk Warlock subclasses. I've just got 2 for you here, Arc and Strand. The Arc build is the exact same one that I've mentioned in the previous GM. I also want to point out this time around, of course, Elemental Embrace. If you are amplified, you do get that 50% Arc DR. So why does that matter in this GM? Well, in the final boss room, you will have a few wizards with solar shields spawn in, and if you are using the strat that we recommend, where you're under one of those raised platforms, they spawn in over on those sides, and they do deal arc damage in quick succession. If you're hiding under there, just be aware they'll spawn to your right. If you're under the right platform there, they spawn at the far back side of that wall, and they do have an angle on you if you're trying to hide from the Shrieker, if it's in the middle or the far side of the room. So that's nice to have a little bit of arc protection. I think there's also the Barrier Knights do have arc damage as well, if I'm not mistaken. So you will have some use out of that arc DR if you do choose to go down that route, if you want to be on an arc subclass. But again, it's Fallen Sunstar and Cold Heart just generating a bunch of arc souls, and then also Ionic Traces. The Strand build, though, is the one that I've been mentioning pretty much ever since Strand came out. Needlestorm and then Threadlings, right? We're using Swarmers. The exotic weapon of choice here would be Quicksilver Storm. We're still kind of having to deal with the fact that Tangles are a premium currency on any fire team. So I would say that if you are in a fire team with other Strand users, say for example a Strand Titan or a Strand Hunter, generate tangles for them, and then know that you're probably the lowest priority for whatever you want to do with the tangle. Like, there's really the buffs that Titans and Hunters can utilize through using tangles, destroying tangles specifically, are far greater for themselves and the fire team as a whole than whatever a Swarmer's Warlock can do on their Strand subclass. So that may change down the future, but until then, maybe only really do something with tangles if you're the only Strand user in your fire team. But you can absolutely use Quicksilver Storm just for the generation of tangles, but maybe don't shoot them or pick them up and just call them out to your fire team is probably the best way to be a good fire team member here. We're using Weaver's Call, Mindspun, Invocation as our aspects. For the threads, I am using Evolution for better threadlings, Continuity for the longer unravel effects, and remember we're getting unravel from our Swarmer's exotic armor here. Thread of Warding, where picking up an Orb of Power grants Woven Mail. I feel like that one's pretty obvious. And then of course Thread of Generation, where we get grenade energy when we deal damage. On my mods, arms, fastball, grenade kickstart, chest, we're using resistances, legs, better already, innervation, class, time dilation, outreach, and bomber. Use the threadlings to keep the enemies at bay, which is especially helpful in that final boss room. You'll have a lot of minor enemies try to rush you while you're hiding beneath that staircase. That can make it a little bit tough if you're trying to focus on the champions that spawn in the boss room. So use the threadlings to kind of keep the minor enemies away while you're focusing on the barrier knights. And then of course your Needlestorm super will be great for clearing out high health targets in the middle and the final rooms, especially that chorister. So you've got a nice damage super in your back pocket. Same thing for Chaos Reach, of course, that would also work, but you'll be a little bit more exposed just due to the nature of that super. All right, pain points. Good to know things about this activity. When you're heading down into the robotics bay, which is where you have to deal with the chorister, just be aware that due to the nature of how the chorister spawns, It could be the case that the chorister spawns a little bit early and gets pretty close to the totem. So if you want to get any long-range crowd control like a Queen Breaker Blind or an Augur Scepter Freeze Beam, Two-Tailed Foxes, or Wave Splitter Suppression, that would be a really good option to give yourself time for the fire team to jump down without getting blasted by some of the other enemies that are present immediately. Definitely an ability like a stasis turret, just a general stasis freeze from a super, for example, would be really helpful here if you want to go down that route, but you don't need to. We've got a lot of different options, but long-range crowd control effects will be really helpful here. So just be aware of that, because you definitely don't want to be in this room when the debuff is active here, but just know that you'll have a little bit of time if the chorister should make it to that annihilation totem and begin summoning the debuff, but it's a pretty quick turnaround for when you go from jumping through that middle floor area all the way to the bottom. So be aware of that. As mentioned before, go ahead, Court.
Sorry, Impetus. I'm thinking Wicked Implement would be really good here, just to really stun lock that chorister. Didn't list that, but now that with its recent buffs, just being able to hit those headshots, it's a scout rifle, get that long range, slow it down, freeze it, and then that's where your teammates can start bursting down the rest of the ads, and then obviously the chorister itself.
Great call out. That's also going to have an unstoppable mod option, and there are unstoppable ogres even in that encounter or section of the encounter as well. So great shout out for a Wicked Implement that would do the job there. As we've mentioned before, the boss location shouldn't be too stressful. It's a fairly easy one as far as GM boss rooms go. You'll have plenty of cover if you hide under either the raised platform on the left or the right side of the arena. You'll still need to deal with thralls and other trash combatants. The ads don't typically get under the raised platform, but they will huddle around there. And so you'll be safe from the Shrieker, but you'll have plenty of other enemies trying to either get to you or shoot at you from a few different angles in between the staircases and whatnot. So that, again, another thing where having some kind of burst damage weapon, like a grenade launcher, a wayfaring grenade launcher would be really great here. Again, I kind of use threadlings in that place just to keep all of those enemies at bay, so you can group up and prioritize targets as you guys need to as a fire team would be really great here. Once you do need to go out and get the arc shielded captains that drop the arc charge, just know that they're going to be a bit of a menace. They have a good bit of health. But again, you probably already spec'd for a fair amount of crowd control for the previous rooms, so you can still use those elements against those captains for easy success. Just make sure that you do get to the arc charge before it despawns. So those are probably the most painful things to be aware of here. What are we looking at for a time to complete for a first-time clear? I can't even remember when I did it earlier this season how long it was. I don't think it was not more than 30 minutes when we got our clear together. Do you guys remember? I know you had GM report up, Court.
Yeah, so
my times are so skewed.
I'm looking at, so this wasn't with Saint, it was with one of our patrons, Creamy Cody. It was me, Impetus, and Cody here. I think our first run was like 32 minutes.
Okay.
And 2 seconds. One we did with Bryce, Saint, was 27 minutes, 28 minutes. And then the one that we did was, the three of us, was 25 minutes and 1 second, which is my best time. And so yeah, we're talking 35 minutes, 40 minutes maybe if you're really taking it slow, and then if you're tidying things up in terms of really focusing, refining things, then I think 25 minutes, maybe even 20 minutes if you're really speed running it. Again, I said that kind of the offset for this GM, it's certainly not the most difficult one. It takes a little while. There is certainly some encounters that can be pretty taxing. But once you get some runs in, it's pretty much of a cakewalk.
I'm trying to think of the most taxing area. I don't know if there is one that really stood out in the same way that the previous GM, of course, had the Protect Ghost middle room. I don't think the Clovis Head area was too terrible. Maybe that first large room, I suppose, because you do have the sniper shanks that kind of spawn in that back half. Those can catch you off guard. It's a pretty wide space, probably one of the widest spaces that we have for a GM, and there's definitely long-range enemies plus the invisible, like a good range of different things.
For first-timers, in the laser hallway, there's a certain trigger that happens. We won't spoil it here, but that may be the first taxing area, but
Yeah.
no spoilers here.
I have another time on my report here that's about 10 minutes because I was doing some runs
10?
during the crafting, as people have come to call it. So I was just showing up here with my absolutely busted flank stride that was shooting aggressive shotgun shots, that was proccing mulligan and infinitely refilling its own magazine because each one of those shotgun pellets counted as a single bullet, and if you missed one, you would get one back.
Shane, we're supposed to be a squeaky clean podcast.
Yes.
No illegal cheating.
I used my hacked machine gun to power through some 10-minute clears.
Fair enough.
But yeah,
Saint was typing to Eris like an absolute chad.
I'll do a lot for a hive god. You know what I'm saying, man? Do a lot for a hive god. But I think the biggest thing I can recommend is using that. If you're on strand, using isolation with rapid fire ranger will make some of those long range encounters just like way take the difficulty down and pump your damage up for just landing your shots with the weapons that you're already using, which is, you're not having to change your playstyle. You're getting a weaken effect on the enemy. You're getting the little sever burst every now and then on these enemies. Incredibly potent combo this season.
Yeah, for statistics with the three of us, that 25-minute run. So I was on Arc subclass with Sweet Sorrow, Queensbreaker, Riptide. Saint, you were on Berserker, with Revision Zero, Loaded Question, Hothead. And Impetus, you were on Stormcaller with Fallen Sunstar, with Wishender and Sail Spy, Pitch Glass. Mm-hmm. And that was our best run. That was a really good run. If I can cast my mind back to, it was 24 days ago. But yeah,
I mean, Revision Zero could be pretty hot coming into the season 23 here, because I remember using it against the ads and thinking it was doing fine, especially with that aggressive burst as a lot of damage. Once we get that champ damage increase, I'm thinking that's going to be giving Wishender a real run for its money.
That was your most used weapon, 48 kills, as opposed to 15 with Loaded and 9 with Hothead. Impetus with a 71 with Wishender and 55 with Sweet Sorrow for me. But obviously we were using abilities a lot as well.
Yeah.
Like Saint with his 15 with the super, 21 with his melee.
Dude, I'm telling you, the Fletched Storm's popping off, man.
Okay. 20 with my skip grenades, yeah. I shout out to GM.report. This is a very comprehensive application, because it even shows us what the loadouts we were using. It does nice. Say here with a little note that it can only fetch 2 minutes after the strike's completed. So if you've changed your loadout within that 2 minutes, it may not be accurate. But I think, we played it and then we were just kind of chatting away after that. So very sweet website. Definitely recommend. All right, lads. Any final thoughts for this episode?
Not a bad season of GMs. Not the hardest, not the worst. A couple easy guys, couple hard guys thrown in there. Pretty good mix.
Yeah, I wish that the Moon one could have been tuned a little bit differently, but I'm not too worried about it. Again, I don't really need to farm for any of these weapons, but the schedule is such that the weapons will fall on other GMs over the course of other seasons. Well, say that, keep forgetting we've only got one more season, so who knows how that's all going to change. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see, I guess, how, going forward. Never mind, the entire point I was about to make will no longer be relevant. Oh, gosh, it's going to take so much adjusting to get used to. But yeah, if you're going for the completion, just buckle up in regards to the Moon one. It can be pretty rough there But once you're past that middle room, the boss room did not give us a lot of trouble. We were just kind of stayed in that close, the close corners here, either left or right. Again, the room is really large, and you do have pillars and some blockades that give you plenty of cover from that middle raised platform, which is where the boss will hang out, but then also where a lot of the ads will spawn in. So you can get a good view of that easily to throw your grenades, do your crowd control stuff, to lock down spawns, call out spawns, all that good stuff. It's just that middle room due to the design and the way that the enemies all come in at once and then keep coming in for what feels like on an infinite basis, although maybe we could have spent some more time in there to really test that theory. That can be tough. So stay in that little entry hallway. You've got staircase right behind you, so you can go up to really get away from some of those tracking projectiles. I know that we were all utilizing that strat. And there's no turn back zone, I don't think, so you could probably go all the way back up that hallway if you really wanted to. So
yeah, and I think just to kind of highlight that point, we've seen changes to the other battlegrounds, specifically the Mars one.
Yep.
That boss room has actually changed since we broke it down. We broke it down back in season 20, and it wasn't as it was pretty chaotic back then. So Bungie may be kind of fairly reactive to the reception of this GM, maybe not for this season, but for a future season or episode, whatever you want, however this is going to work out in the future. So yeah, they may change it. But yeah, I completely agree that that middle room's just awful. It's not a fun experience, even with like supreme crowd control kind of taking up the room. It's not that great. All right, well, that is another episode in the bag, lads, episode 81. We want to thank our listeners, patrons and sponsors, and of course our audio engineer, Autodidaktos, for keeping us sounding fresh every week. Next week, we are heading back to the PvE University with another massive breakdown of some PvE basics. Until then, my name is Court. You can find me over on various social media websites and the Discord as Court Projects. You can find my infographics, spreadsheets, and all that jazz, along with other third-party community applications and spreadsheets to enhance your Destiny experience over on the Destiny Massive Breakdowns website and the Destiny Spreadsheets link tree. Impetus, where can we find you?
My name is Impetus. You can find me by that name in Discord and in Destiny. Saint, where can we find you?
Yep, name is Saint Kabir. You can find me on various social media sites by Saint Kabir or hanging out in that Massive Breakdowns Discord server. Thanks for listening to another episode of PvE.